It was just a piece of bread, warm in her hands, wrapped in thin paper from the bakery. Ordinary in every way. And yet, as Grace stood beneath the flickering streetlight on Cedar Street, it felt heavier than it should have, as if that small loaf carried a question only she could answer. She could still walk away. The bus stop was quiet, the way it always was in the evenings. A metal bench, a faded route map, a trash can tipped slightly to one side. People passed through here every day, waiting for something, then moving on. Grace had passed it hundreds of times without stopping. Tonight was different. Grace Miller was 24 years old, though life had already given her a seriousness beyond her years. She wasn't unhappy, she just lived carefully. Carefully with money, carefully with hope, carefully with her heart. She lived in a small apartment above a closed laundromat near the edge of town. The sign outside was cracked, letters missing, hanging by rusted chains. Inside, the building smelled faintly of soap and old concrete. The stairs creaked with every step, but Grace had learned which boards to avoid. The apartment itself was simple. One bedroom, one small kitchen, a couch that had seen better days. But it was clean, warm enough, and safe. Grace worked part-time at a bakery downtown. She liked the early mornings there, the quiet before the city woke up, the way dough slowly rose, patient and forgiving. The smell of bread reminded her that even the simplest things required care. Every morning she woke before sunrise. Every evening she walked home the same route. And every night she counted her money at the kitchen table while her younger sister, Lily, studied nearby. Lily was 17, bright, gentle. She dreamed of college, of a future that felt far beyond their small apartment. Grace smiled and encouraged her, even when fear whispered in her own heart. Grace didn't talk much about her worries. She carried them quietly. That evening, as Grace was leaving work, her manager held up a loaf of bread. "Didn't bake right," he said. "You want it?" Grace nodded and placed a few coins on the counter anyway. Bread was bread. As she walked home, the air felt cool against her face. Streetlights blinked on one by one, painting the sidewalk in soft yellow light. Cars passed slowly. Somewhere, a radio played faint music through an open window. Everything felt ordinary, until she noticed him. He stood near the bus stop bench, hands buried deep in the pockets of a worn jacket. He wasn't holding a sign. He wasn't calling out to anyone. He was simply standing there, staring at the ground like someone waiting for courage to arrive. Grace slowed her steps. She noticed his shoes first, clean but worn thin at the soles. Then his posture, straight but tired, as if standing itself required effort. And finally his face, not desperate, not angry, just heavy with something unseen. People passed him without looking. Grace stopped. She felt something quiet move inside her, a gentle pull. Not guilt, not obligation, just awareness. The man glanced up, surprised to see her still standing there. "I'm okay," he said quickly, as if he had learned to say it before being asked. "I don't need money." Grace shook her head gently. "I didn't think you did," she said. The streetlight flickered above them. Silence settled between them, soft and unforced. Grace looked down at the paper bag in her hands. For a brief moment, she thought of Lily, of dinner, of stretching food another day. Then she opened the bag and held out the bread. "I was going to eat this," she said quietly, "but I can share." The man hesitated. His eyes moved from the bread to her face. "You shouldn't," he said softly. "You don't know me." Grace smiled, not wide, just honest. "I don't think that matters." After a long moment, he reached out and accepted it, holding it carefully, as if it were something fragile. "Thank you," he said. "My name is Ethan." "Grace."
He took a small bite. His shoulders relaxed slightly, as if his body had been holding itself together all day. They didn't talk much after that. They didn't need to. No explanations. No stories. Just presence.
Grace walked home that night with empty hands, but a strange warmth in her chest. Lily noticed it immediately. "You're smiling," Lily said as she looked up from her book. Grace shrugged. "Am I?" "Yeah," Lily replied, "like something good happened." Grace didn't answer. Later that night, after Lily fell asleep, Grace sat by the window and whispered a short prayer. "God," she said softly, "help me stay kind, even when I don't have much." Across town, Ethan sat on the bus stop bench, finishing the last piece of bread. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth settle into him. He hadn't eaten all day, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. Neither of them knew it yet, but love had already begun watching. Quietly, patiently, without rushing. The next morning arrived quietly, like it didn't want to disturb anything. Pale sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of Grace's apartment, landing softly on the kitchen table, where yesterday's bread bag still rested, empty. Grace woke before her alarm. She lay still for a moment, listening. The distant sound of traffic, a neighbor closing a door, Lily's steady breathing from the other room. Everything felt the same, and yet something inside Grace felt gently unsettled, like a question waiting for an answer. She got up and moved through her routine. Coffee brewed slowly. Toast popped up a little too dark. She packed Lily's inhaler into her bag, kissed her forehead, and wished her a good day at school. "You okay?" Lily asked, watching her closely. Grace smiled. "Yeah, just thinking." At work, the bakery buzzed softly with its usual rhythm. Trays slid into ovens, flour dusted the counters. Customers came and went, asking for coffee, rolls, and change they never waited for. Grace worked with quiet focus, but her mind wandered. She kept seeing the bus stop, the way Ethan held the bread, the way his shoulders eased after the first bite. It surprised her how much such a small moment stayed with her. During her break, Grace sat outside on the back step of the bakery, sipping lukewarm coffee. She wondered where Ethan had gone after she left, if he had found somewhere warm, if the bread had lasted. She told herself not to get attached. Kindness didn't require attachment. That evening, Grace walked home the same way she always did. The sky was painted with early dusk, clouds stretched thin like brushstrokes. As she approached Cedar Street, her steps slowed without her noticing. The bus stop came into view. Ethan was there. This time he was sitting on the bench, hands resting on his knees, staring straight ahead. When he noticed her, he stood quickly, almost nervously. "Hi," he said. Grace felt a small, unexpected flutter in her chest. "Hi. I didn't expect to see you again," he added. "Me neither," she said honestly. They stood there for a moment, unsure of where to place themselves in the space they had already shared once before. "I wanted to say thank you again," Ethan said, "about yesterday." "You don't have to," Grace replied. "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." There was a pause. Cars passed. A bus roared by without stopping. "I didn't eat much before you came," Ethan said quietly. "That bread meant more than you know." Grace nodded, unsure what to say. They talked slowly, carefully, like two people testing the edges of conversation. Nothing deep, nothing heavy, just small pieces of themselves. Ethan told her he used to work in construction. Grace told him about the bakery. He mentioned liking the quiet evenings. She admitted she did too. He didn't ask her for anything. That mattered. As the days passed, their meetings became a quiet pattern. Not every night, not planned, but often enough that Grace began to notice when Ethan wasn't there. Sometimes they spoke for only a few minutes. Sometimes they sat in silence. That silence never felt awkward. It felt respectful. One evening, Grace brought an extra apple. Another night, Ethan brought 2 cups of coffee from a nearby gas station. "For balance," he said with a small smile. Grace laughed softly. She learned things about him slowly, that his wife, Hannah, had died a few years ago, that the loss had come quietly, then all at once, that bills followed grief, and loneliness followed everything.
"I didn't ask for help," Ethan said one night. "I thought I could fix it all myself." Grace listened. "And then one day," he continued, "I realized I hadn't talked to anyone in weeks." Grace felt her chest tighten. "I think God notices when people are alone," she said softly. Ethan looked at her, surprised. "I think so too."
At home, Lily noticed the change in Grace. "You're leaving earlier," Lily said one night, "and coming back lighter." Grace smiled. "I made a friend." Lily studied her. "You deserve that." But not everyone understood. A co-worker at the bakery pulled Grace aside one afternoon. "I saw you talking to that guy near Cedar Street," she said quietly. "Just be careful." Grace felt her stomach drop. "He's not dangerous," she replied. "I'm just saying," the woman shrugged. "People can take advantage." Grace walked home that night with doubt whispering in her mind. Was she being foolish? Was kindness blinding her?
When she reached the bus stop, Ethan was already there. "You okay?" he asked, noticing her quietness. Grace hesitated, then spoke honestly. "Do you ever feel like people expect the worst of you?" Ethan smiled sadly. "All the time." They sat together as the sun faded. Grace whispered another quiet prayer in her heart. "God, if I'm doing this wrong, guide me." The answer didn't come as words. It came as peace. And slowly, without either of them realizing it, the space between two evenings began to feel like the start of something deeper, something watched over by patience, faith, and a love that still waited quietly in the background.
Autumn arrived quietly, like it always did. The leaves didn't rush to fall. They loosened their grip slowly, one by one, trusting the wind to carry them when the time was right. Grace noticed the season change in small ways. The mornings felt cooler. Lily asked for her sweater more often. The bakery windows fogged slightly when the ovens warmed the room. And Ethan stayed. Not every night, not always at the same time, but often enough that Grace had begun to recognize the rhythm of his presence, the way he stood when she approached, the way his voice softened when she said her name. "Hey, Grace." She found comfort in that sound. One evening, as they sat at the bus stop, Ethan seemed distant. His hands were clasped tightly, his eyes fixed on the street ahead. "You're quiet," Grace said gently. Ethan exhaled. "I had an interview today." Grace turned toward him. "That's good, right?" He nodded slowly. "It should be." "What happened?" "They asked where I've been living," he said. "I didn't lie. I just didn't say everything." Grace felt the weight of his words. "They said they'd call," he added, "but I could see it in their eyes. Once people hear you don't have an address, they stop listening." Grace swallowed. "That doesn't mean you don't matter," she said. Ethan looked at her then, really looked. "You're the only one who says things like that." The words stayed with Grace long after she returned home that night.
But kindness, as gentle as it is, does not always move without resistance. The next day, Grace was called into the bakery manager's office. It was small and smelled faintly of burnt coffee. "I've had a few concerns brought to me," the manager said carefully. Grace sat upright. "About what?" "About you," the woman replied. "Spending time outside with that man near Cedar Street." Grace's heart tightened. "He's my friend," she said. "I'm sure he is," the manager said softly. "But customers talk, and this is a business." Grace felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice calm. "I don't bring him inside. I don't neglect my work." "That's not the point," the manager said. "I just need you to understand how it looks." Grace nodded, though something inside her ached. That evening, she arrived at the bus stop later than usual. The sky was already darkening. For a moment, she thought Ethan wasn't there. Then she saw him standing slightly farther away than usual. "You okay?" he asked. Grace hesitated, then told him the truth. Ethan listened silently. When she finished, he shook his head slowly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said. "Maybe it's better if I don't." "No," Grace said quickly. Then she softened her voice. "I mean, you didn't do anything wrong." He smiled faintly. "Still, I don't want your life to be harder because of me." Grace thought of all the times her life had already been hard, of all the kindness that had made it lighter. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "doing the right thing feels uncomfortable, but that doesn't make it wrong." Ethan studied her, as if seeing her strength more clearly now. At home, Grace knelt beside her bed that night. "I don't know what you're doing," she whispered, "but I trust you." The days that followed tested that trust. Ethan missed 2 evenings in a row. Grace told herself not to worry. She focused on work, on Lily, on the ordinary things that needed attention. But each night her eyes drifted toward the bus stop anyway. On the 3rd evening, rain began to fall. Light at first, then heavier. Grace stood under the small shelter at the stop, her heart restless. Then she saw him. Ethan approached slowly, soaked through, his jacket darker with rain. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to disappear."
Grace shook her head. "You don't owe me explanations." "I know," he said, "but I wanted you to know. I almost gave up." Grace felt her throat tighten. "On what?" "On trying," he said. "On believing things could change." She stepped closer, her voice steady but full of warmth. "And what stopped you?" Ethan looked down, then back up. "You did." Grace blinked. "You showed me kindness when I didn't think I deserved it," he said. "That kind of thing stays with a person." Rain fell between them, soft and steady. In that moment, Grace realized something important. Kindness doesn't always fix problems quickly. Sometimes it simply keeps a soul from breaking. And that night, under the quiet rain, something deeper took root. Not romance yet, not promises, but a shared understanding that they were both still standing, that faith, even when quiet, was working, and that love often begins as patience, waiting, watching, and choosing kindness again. Some moments do not announce themselves. They arrive quietly, like a soft knock you almost miss, and when you open the door, you realize something important has been waiting on the other side. For Grace, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday. She was leaving the bakery early that afternoon, her hands smelling faintly of bread and sugar. Lily had a school event, and Grace had promised she would be there. As she stepped outside, she noticed Ethan across the street, sitting alone on the edge of the bus stop bench. He wasn't waiting, he was thinking. She crossed the street slowly. "Hey," she said. Ethan looked up, surprised. "I didn't think you'd be here this early." "I usually wouldn't," Grace said. "What's wrong?" Ethan hesitated. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper.
"I got a call," he said, "from the construction company." Grace's heart lifted. "That's good news, right?" "They offered me a short-term job," he said. 3 weeks. If I prove myself, it could turn into more." Grace smiled, genuine joy in her eyes. "That's amazing." "It is," he said, "but there's a problem." Grace waited. "I need an address," he continued, "just for paperwork, somewhere stable." Grace felt the weight of his words. She knew what he was not asking, and yet the question lingered between them. "I understand if you can't," Ethan added quickly. "I just needed to tell someone." Grace nodded slowly.
That evening, Grace sat with Lily at the kitchen table, helping her with homework. Lily looked up suddenly. "You're thinking again," she said. Grace smiled faintly. "Am I that obvious?" Lily shrugged. "You always look like that when you're trying to decide something important." Grace leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. "Do you think," she asked carefully, "that helping someone can sometimes feel scary?" Lily thought for a moment. "Only if it matters." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. That night, Grace prayed longer than usual, not with words that demanded answers, but with a heart that listened. "Show me what love looks like here," she whispered. The answer came the next morning, not as a voice, but as courage.
Grace met Ethan at the bus stop that evening. "I thought about what you said," she began. Ethan stiffened slightly.
And? I can't offer much, Grace said gently, but you can use my address. For the job. Ethan's eyes widened. Grace, I don't want to put you in a difficult position. You're not, she replied. I'm choosing this. He looked at her for a long moment, emotion pressing against restraint. Thank you, he said quietly. I won't forget this. I know, Grace said.
Days passed quickly after that. Ethan began work early every morning. He stopped by the bakery sometimes, dusty and tired, but smiling in a way Grace had never seen before. I forgot how good it feels to be useful, he said one afternoon. Grace watched him from behind the counter, her heart warm. But not everyone shared that warmth. One evening, as Grace walked home, a neighbor approached her. I've seen that man around your place, the woman said, not unkindly, but firmly. Grace felt her stomach tighten. He's a friend. You're a good person, the neighbor said. Just protect yourself. Grace nodded, but doubt crept in again. That night, Grace found Ethan sitting at the bus stop, head in his hands. They found out, he said before she could speak. Found out what? That I'm using your address, he said. Someone at work asked questions. Grace sat beside him. I don't want to cause problems for you, Ethan continued. If this puts your home at risk, I'll tell them to remove it. Grace placed her hand gently over his. No, she said. If this job is part of your path forward, I won't step back now. Ethan looked at her, eyes shining with unshed tears. Why? He asked. Grace took a deep breath. Because love doesn't always feel safe, but it always feels right. The word lingered between them. Love. They didn't rush it, they didn't label it, but they both felt the truth settling quietly into place. Weeks passed. Ethan proved himself at work. His supervisor noticed his dedication. His hours extended. One evening, he arrived at the bus stop holding a small paper bag. For you, he said. Grace peeked inside. A loaf of fresh bread. I wanted to give something back, he said softly. Grace laughed, emotion thick in her voice. You already have. As they sat together that night, watching the sky deepen into stars, Grace felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Not because everything was perfect, but because she had listened when fate whispered, and because kindness, once again, had quietly opened the door to something beautiful.
Winter approached slowly, bringing with it a chill that settled into the city like a soft blanket. The sidewalks gleamed after early snowfalls, and the streetlights reflected on the wet pavement in golden pools. Grace wrapped her coat tightly around herself, Lily at her side, and walked home from the bakery. The cold nipped at her cheeks, but her heart was warm. Ethan had started working steadily. Every morning he left before the sun rose, returning at night with tired shoulders but a small, genuine smile that lingered even after the long day. Grace noticed how he carried himself differently now, stronger, braver, less burdened by the invisible weight he had once carried. One evening, after closing the bakery, Grace decided to walk past the bus stop, even though she wasn't sure she'd find him there. But there he was, as always, sitting quietly on the edge of the bench, the city buzzing softly around him. His eyes lifted when he saw her, lighting up with a smile that made her chest ache with a quiet, familiar joy. Hey, he said. Hey, she replied, careful not to let her voice betray the flutter she always felt when she spoke to him. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the cold air wrapping around them. Then Ethan spoke softly. I don't know how to thank you for all of this, he said, gesturing vaguely between them, to the bread, the support, the quiet faith she had shown in him. You don't have to, Grace said. Kindness isn't a debt. It's a choice. Ethan studied her face, his gaze lingering on the warmth in her eyes. For a long moment they said nothing, but the quiet spoke volumes. Then, without thinking, Ethan reached for her hand. His touch was gentle, careful, as if afraid it might break the fragile space they were creating. Grace didn't pull away. She let her fingers intertwine with his, surprised by how natural it felt. You make things feel possible, he admitted, even when everything seems impossible. Grace felt the words press against her chest, settling there like a soft truth she had been waiting to hear. She squeezed his hand gently. And you remind me, she said softly, that hope doesn't have to be loud to exist. They talked long into the evening, about small things, the bakery, the streets, Lily's homework, the simple routines that made life feel steady. But underneath, unspoken and patient,
something deeper began to grow, a quiet understanding, a soft connection that felt both fragile and inevitable.
As weeks passed, the bond between them strengthened. Grace began to notice little gestures that warmed her heart. The way Ethan would save a piece of bread for her when he had only a small snack for himself. The careful way he would bring an umbrella when it rained. The way his eyes softened whenever he looked at her. One snowy afternoon, Grace found herself at the bus stop earlier than usual. Ethan was already there, brushing snow from his coat. "I thought we could share a walk," he said, offering her his arm. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then took it. And in that simple act, the air between them shifted. The cold seemed to fade. The world, even if only for a moment, felt still and safe.
As they walked, Ethan spoke quietly. "Grace, I've been thinking," he said, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "About us, about everything that's happened." Grace listened, holding his arm a little tighter. "I don't want to rush anything," he continued, "but I want to be part of your life, fully. Not just a friend at a bus stop, not just someone you help out of kindness. I want to be someone you can trust, someone you can count on." Grace felt a tear slip down her cheek. She blinked quickly, not from sadness, but from the depth of emotion. I feel the same," she admitted, "but it's more than trust, more than kindness. It's a quiet, steady feeling that grows every time I see you, and I think it's love." Ethan stopped walking. They stood in the soft snow, hands still entwined. "Love," he repeated, almost like a prayer. Grace nodded. "Yes, quiet, gentle, not dramatic, not loud, but real." Ethan smiled, a mixture of relief, wonder, and gratitude washing over his face. "I think God has been patient with us," he said, "guiding us to this in ways we didn't even notice." Grace leaned her head lightly on his shoulder. "I think so too." For the first time in a long while, both of them allowed themselves to breathe fully, to feel fully. The hardships, the loneliness, the doubts, they didn't disappear, but they felt lighter because they were shared, because they had someone who understood. Over the next few weeks, life unfolded quietly, beautifully. Grace and Ethan shared small breakfasts before work, walks after sunset, and evenings spent talking about their dreams and fears. Lily adored him, sensing the calm, protective presence he brought to their home. One snowy evening, after helping Lily with homework, Grace and Ethan sat at the kitchen table, sharing hot chocolate and a loaf of fresh bread. "I never imagined it could be like this," Grace said, smiling softly. "Simple, quiet, yet everything feels fuller." Ethan nodded. "It's amazing how much change a single act of kindness can start. A loaf of bread, a moment of faith, a choice to care." Grace felt a warmth spread through her, deeper than the hot chocolate in her hands. She realized that love, when nurtured by patience and kindness, could bloom in the quietest spaces. And in that moment, she whispered a short prayer, not for herself, but in gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me that small acts can lead to something beautiful, for bringing him into my life." Ethan looked at her, sensing the depth behind her words. "Grace, sometimes I think the universe, or God, or fate, whatever you want to call it, was quietly waiting for us to notice each other," he said. Grace nodded, resting her head gently on his shoulder. The room was warm. Outside, snowflakes drifted softly, painting the world in white. And for the first time in years, both of them felt completely seen, completely understood, completely safe, in the quiet presence of someone who truly cared. It wasn't grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was bread shared, prayers whispered, kindness noticed, and love quietly watching all along. And in that simplicity, they found everything they had been searching for.
The winter mornings were cold, but Grace hardly noticed anymore. The streets were lined with snow-dusted trees, and the faint sound of car tires crunching against the frozen pavement became a rhythm she had come to cherish. Life, it seemed, had begun to shift, not through loud announcements or dramatic events, but quietly, patiently, like the first light of dawn slowly spilling into a dark room. Ethan had grown into the rhythm of her life, not as a visitor, not as a fleeting presence at the bus stop, but as part of the small household that Grace shared with Lily. He woke early, helped with chores when he could, and most importantly, offered support without asking for recognition. Grace realized that this was the truest form of love she had ever known, silent, consistent, and grounded in empathy. One evening, after a long day at the bakery, Grace returned home to find Ethan in the kitchen, carefully laying out a small dinner. Lily peeked from the living room, eyes wide with delight. "Ethan made spaghetti," she exclaimed. "Can we eat now?" Grace smiled, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the intention, the thoughtfulness, the small acts that had quietly transformed her home. Ethan looked up and gave her a soft, almost shy smile. "Thought it might be nice," he said. "We all deserve a little comfort after today." Grace nodded, taking a seat. "It's perfect," she said, meaning more than the meal. It was everything: the kindness, the care, the shared moments, the laughter in Lily's voice. As they ate together, the conversation flowed naturally. Lily talked about school projects, Grace shared a funny story from the bakery, and Ethan reddened, occasionally adding quiet observations that both women laughed. There was no rush, no grand spectacle, just a gentle harmony that felt like home. After dinner, Grace found herself alone with Ethan for a moment, cleaning the dishes together. The warm water, the soft clinking of plates, and the faint aroma of garlic and bread created a peaceful, intimate space. "You've changed things," Ethan said quietly, handing her a plate. "Not just in my life, but here, too. For me, for Lily, for you, everything feels lighter." Grace met his gaze. "It's been a journey," she said softly. "But kindness has a way of rippling out. One small choice can grow into something bigger than we imagine." Ethan nodded, his eyes reflecting the soft kitchen light. "I know that now. I see it in every day, in every little gesture. You reminded me that hope is always possible, even when we don't see it right away." Grace felt a warmth she hadn't known before, not romantic in the dramatic sense, but deep and steady, a sense that they were building something lasting, something rooted in care, trust, and quiet faith. As winter deepened, so did their connection. They spent evenings walking through snow-covered streets, sharing small conversations about dreams, fears, and the life they hoped to build. Ethan became more confident at work, praised by his supervisor for diligence and integrity. Grace continued at the bakery, her own smile brighter, her heart lighter, and Lily thrived, inspired by the example of compassion and steady love around her. One particularly cold evening, Grace returned from the bakery to find Ethan waiting outside, holding a small paper bag. He extended it toward her, a playful smile on his face. "For you," he said. Grace opened it to find a freshly baked loaf of bread from the bakery. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're impossible," she said. "You know I work there." "I thought you might like a taste from me," Ethan replied, his eyes twinkling. "Besides, it's about the gesture, not the bread." Grace felt her heart stir. "It's perfect," she said. She leaned toward him, letting the moment stretch quietly between them. No words were needed. The soft snowfall around them seemed to hold its breath, witnessing something delicate and beautiful.
Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of their lives solidified. Grace reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A loaf of bread, a simple act of noticing someone in need, a choice to act despite uncertainty. She thought of the prayers she had whispered in quiet moments, the small faith she had clung to, and the gentle ways life had guided her toward love. Ethan stood by her side not because she had rescued him, but because they had met each other in kindness, in patience, in understanding. Together they had discovered a love that was neither hurried nor forced, but steady, resilient, and rooted in empathy. One snowy evening, as they returned from a walk with Lily skipping ahead, Grace paused at the bus stop where it had all begun. She looked at Ethan, then at the bench where he had once sat alone. "Do you remember this place?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled, following her gaze. "How could I forget? It's where I found hope again, where everything started. Grace nodded, her heart full. Sometimes I wonder if that loaf of bread wasn't just bread, but a nudge from fate or from God, something beyond our understanding. Ethan reached for her hand, holding it gently. I think you're right. It felt ordinary, but it was anything but. It changed everything. They stood there quietly, watching the snow drift down, feeling the warmth of each other's presence. Grace whispered a short prayer of gratitude, not for wealth or grand miracles, but for the gentle, patient unfolding of kindness, trust, and love. Thank you, she said softly, for guiding us even when we didn't see the path clearly. Ethan squeezed her hand, for showing me that even small gestures can create something extraordinary. And in that moment, the world felt right. Grace realized that love had been watching all along, quiet, patient, and steady. It had grown not through drama or spectacle, but through choice, compassion, and the courage to care when it seemed small, insignificant, or risky. She looked at Ethan, at Lily, at the quiet street blanketed in snow, and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Life would continue to bring challenges, but she had learned that kindness, simple, sincere, selfless, could transform everything. And perhaps that was the greatest gift of all.
Grace smiled, leaning into Ethan's shoulder as Lily skipped ahead. The snow continued to fall softly. The world hushed around them. They walked home together, not rushed, not needing grand gestures, just the quiet joy of being seen, understood, and loved. And as they disappeared into the warm glow of their apartment, the bus stop remained empty, holding memories of the small acts that had started it all. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change someone's world. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope.